introduction, Dean Ryan. I think we owe Dean Ryan an added round of applause before doing that, for his initiative in the fulfilling the promise of diversity throughout this academic year. Let's give Dean Ryan a hand. From my perspective, this is some of the most important work. The emphasis on issues of equity and justice is, I would say, is commendable, and I think other deans across the country can certainly learn from your lead and your leadership. But Harvard, right? This is the place that should be leading in conversations and leading in ways that might lead us all to a more equitable and just society. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Jody Smith-Bennett for her graciousness and for all of her hard work in getting me here, and to Roger Falcon as well. Where's Roger? I know he's somewhere running around here. Let's give Roger and both Jody a hand for their work. Having moved into the role of administration as director of the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh, I know now, unlike ever in the past, what it takes to put on these kinds of events. And so my hat goes off to you. I have so much I want to say to you, so I think I should get started here so that we're able to maximize our time. 3 framing questions here, and I draw your attention especially to the second question. How do we engage and address issues of race and poverty with humanity and courage? How do we address and engage issues of race and poverty with humanity and courage? And indeed, we are in this work together. I remember when I wrote Start Where You Are, and when I submitted my proposal to the Harvard Ed Press for consideration, I remember talking in the proposal explicitly about my desire to talk to teachers, to talk to educators, to talk to community members about issues germane to meeting the needs of all students. And when I submitted the first draft of Start Where You Are, I received line-by-line feedback from my editor, Doug Clayton. And for those of you who are writers in the room, you understand what it means when you get critical feedback on your writing, right? You kind of get a little sensitive about your stuff, right? And so Doug wrote back, and Doug had all of these critiques about the abstraction and the critique about the conceptual ways in which I was addressing issues for Start Where You Are. And I wrote back in my Vanderbilt way to him, and I just said very succinctly that I'm an academic, and this is how academics talk. And he wrote me back in about 2 sentences, and he said to me very clearly, he said, "I'm simply trying to get you to write the book you proposed. I'm simply trying to get you to speak to the audience with whom you said you wanted to speak." And it was one of those moments, you know, how we have the critical race theorists call it those CRT moments. It was one of those moments that I had to really stop and think. And it was from that point forward, Doug, that I decided to write in a way that really was consistent with who I say I am and what I believe in. So I thank you, Doug, for that. In Start Where You Are, I argue that we really don't have an achievement gap at all. Right? I know some of y'all are probably looking at me like, this dude is nuts. When is he leaving, headed back to Pittsburgh, right? And what I argue in that book is that our language matters. And I argue that what we really have is we have a teacher quality gap, and we have a teacher training gap, and we have an effective leadership gap, and you can say amen if you want to. And we have a challenging curriculum gap, and we have a school funding gap, and we have a digital divide gap, and we have a school counseling gap, and we have a wealth and income gap. We don't have an achievement gap. But what we have is we have an employment opportunity gap, and we have an affordable housing gap, and we have a healthcare gap, right? And we have a nutrition gap, right? We don't have an achievement gap. What we have is we have an instruction gap, and we have a school integration gap, and we have a quality childcare gap, and we have a school and pop culture gap. That's right, I said it. And we have what I argued in the book, an opportunity gap. Imagine if we reframed and we re-engage the very ways in which we talk about the realities of what's happening to our students in our classroom, right? And I'm looking in the room across at you, these faces here. Harvard graduate students, you should be on the front lines of reimagining and rethinking the very ways in which we talk about the students with whom we serve. With whom we serve. Until we penetrate and until we get at addressing these gaps, we're going to find ourselves in a holding pattern. Right? We're going to find ourselves in a holding pattern. So I argue we really don't have an achievement gap in that we should really focus in and zone in on these areas, really drawing from the work of Jackie Irvine and others. Conceptually, in writing Racing to Class, these are some of the books I've read. Outstanding books. There's one book here by Tyrone Howard on why race and culture matter. Race and language. Here are some other examples there for you. This book here by Jason Irizarry, it actually focuses in on, they're actually Mexican-American student voices that are written from first person that sort of illustrate their experiences and the like related to issues of race and language. Regarding race and teaching, these are some of the books that sort of frame and shape the ways in which I think and will talk here today. From a structural perspective, here are a few books there. And from an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary perspective, here are some additional pieces as well that you might find useful. And so in framing and thinking about the notion of race, it's important for us to be mindful that that when you talk about race, you're not only talking about some physical construction, right? We know that race is socially constructed. We also know that race is legally constructed, historically constructed, and is also physically constructed. Now, folks sometimes talk about race and racism, and it's sometimes unclear what we mean when we say racism. And so just to give you a running definition of what I mean by racism, here's an example of the ways in which I think and use race and racism in my work. I would draw your attention especially to issues of power and also to issues of intentionality versus unintentionality, right? So what I've come to understand in my work with teachers or with educators is folks feel like they're not contributing to racist structures and systems, right? Because individually they aren't intentionally engaging or being racist. But race and racism manifest and can manifest both at an unintentional level as well. So I recall when I was conducting a professional development session with some elementary school teachers, I recall a teacher saying to me the following. She said, "Our principal invited you here to talk to us about specific strategies to teach our poor children. I was devouring what you had to say. You were right on target until you got to this race stuff. Race has nothing to do with how to teach my kids living in poverty. What does it mean? Really?" Right? And so what I recall is during that interaction is through my outstanding pedagogical skills, I was trying to bring her back to me, right? So she made this comment and she had every right to pose to pose the question and really to challenge what I was attempting to share. But what I noticed was that she began to doodle. And she doodled and really disengaged me for the remainder of the session, right? And I thought, wow, she has the power, right? The authority to be able to say, I'm going to shut you down because it makes me uncomfortable, right? But how many of our students in schools have that opportunity, right? To shut down things and to shut down opportunities that are oppressive and that are repressive to them, right? That's the question. So from a national data perspective, if you look at these data, they show you in-school suspension. On the left side, I give you a representation from the Office of Civil Rights. These data show you a snapshot of the demographics across the country, and then you look at in-school suspension rates there. Right? You get that sense? I want to move a little bit quickly through this because I have a lot to cover. If you look at outside of school suspension, and again, I include on the left side the racial demography. You see outside of school? You see it? Y'all smile at me or something. Don't just look at me like I'm crazy, all right? All right. Expulsions. When you see this expulsion rate, your heart should race, right? Proportionally. Right? So you might say, well, we're in Cambridge, right? That's the national profile, right? So what does it mean more locally? If you look at Boston, student data, in-school suspension there, proportionally. Why race? Why race? That's why. If you look at outside of school suspensions by race, why race? That's why. That's why. Expulsions. This is Boston. Right? Why race? That's why. In-school suspensions by race. Outside of school suspensions by race. Expulsions in Cambridge. Now, the end, to be fair, with expulsions is low, right? And so as I was pulling these data together, one of the points that one of my team members made was the end is low. But my point is every child matters. Every child matters in that classroom, right? Why race? That's why, right? That's what I want to tell that teacher who called me out, Dr. Lightfoot, right? That's what I want to tell her, right? Free and reduced lunch. This is a national perspective. And then more locally. In the literature, we talk about this as disproportionality, right? That gives you a running definition of disproportionality there. Okay. And so now I want to talk more specifically about this notion of socioeconomic status. And so when you look at these data show you the poverty guidelines here. And these are taken from 2013. And I always use a family of 4 as my reference group. So if a family earns $23,551, that family is considered above the poverty line, right? And so we wonder why some families or why some students are failing or why some students are disengaged, right? When their families live below the poverty line or live close to the poverty line. So how do people succeed in society? How do people succeed in society? And what I want to talk now about is this notion of meritocracy. And meritocracy is the idea that people are rewarded based mostly or solely on their ability, their hard work, and their performance, right? So mindset 1, all groups of people were born with the same opportunity, and if people just follow the law like a formula and work hard and put forth effort, then they will be successful. And then we have a nerve to give examples of folks who've done it. We say Oprah Winfrey did it, right? Didn't she grow up down there in Tennessee, right? And she's transcended poverty. Then why can't you? Why can't others, right? Mindset 2. If people do not succeed, it is because they are not working hard enough, not because of other factors outside of their control. Voices of teachers. One teacher said, I get so sick of people, she was actually talking about me, making something out of nothing. My grandparents immigrated to this country with nothing, and they made something of their lives because they worked hard, right? But I am mindful of what curriculum theorist Beverly Gordon stated, and don't miss this. She says, it is difficult to critique the world and work to change it when the world works for you. Hello. Right? It's difficult to critique that thing and work to change it when the world works for you. Another teacher said, I'm going to be the kind of teacher who follows your advice, Dr. Milner, and have high expectations. If a student is not turning in his homework on time, I'm not going to give any slack. There's a 0 in my grade book. You know, and she used it against me because I've been talking a lot, Dean Ryan, about having high expectations, right? So she used that against me, right? So implications for practice. On a classroom level, we know that factors far outside of merit give people their positions in society. From a sociological perspective, if the meritocracy argument were accurate, all positions would be awarded based on merit. If so, ability should predict who goes to college. Instead, say it, family income, right, is the best predictor. The more a family earns, the more likely their children are to go to college. While some people do get ahead through ability and hard work, others simply inherit wealth and the opportunities that go with it. In short, factors far beyond merit give people their positions in society. And so we can think broadly about what money brings, right? When I started working at Vanderbilt, I had a colleague who asked me to give him a ride to CarMax. He and his family were buying a new car at CarMax. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll give you a ride to CarMax. And as we were driving, my wife at the time was a State Farm agent. And I don't know if y'all know this, but State Farm does car loans. Did y'all know that? So as we were driving, I was trying to get my wife a car loan. I'm just going to put it out there, right? And so as we were driving, I was asking my colleague, I was asking about the interest rate. I was like, what kind of interest rate are you going to get on that thing? And I felt him frowning at me, like as I'm driving. And I'm like, man, if I'm being too personal, it's okay, right? And he was like, Rich, don't you know that cars depreciate as soon as you drive them off the lot? I was like, yep, I know that. He was like, we pay cash for our vehicles, right? And so here's a person who had been at the university just a few years longer than I, and we better be earning about the same amount of money, right? But he was able, right, to purchase a car, to purchase a fairly new car, because he had a trust fund, right? And he was able to go in and write a $20-something thousand check for it. Now, I'm not mad at him. But let's not pretend, right, like we're playing from an even playing field, right? How many of you baseball fans are in here? Any baseball fans here? Okay. It's like being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple, right? Hello, right? Some of us act like we are so outstanding and we are where we are because we've made all the right decisions, right? And things have just lined up for us because we are so exceptionally bright, right? But what I've come to understand in my life is that folks have opened doors for me, right? I'm a product of opportunity. And so when I look across this room at you graduate students, you folks who are the next cadre of professors and teachers and researchers and so forth, my heart is heavy, right? Because I realize, and my question to you is, what doors are you going to open for whom and when and how? And is that going to be a part of your being in your work moving forward? I'm going to come back to that question later. But what does money bring? I consult with one of the wealthiest schools in the state of Tennessee. And as a part of their curriculum, students start ACT and SAT prep in 7th grade, right? In 7th grade. And we have a nerve to compare their performance to students who have not received those kinds of opportunities, right? Let's just call it for what it is. It's not necessarily merit. Right? All right. So let's talk a bit about this notion race. Let's talk about race. And this is not a rhetorical question. Why is it so hard for us to engage the R word? What is it about the R word? What is it? Why can't we engage the R word? I'm practicing wait time. Yeah. What is it about race that makes it so tough? Yes. Okay, the fear of being received as racist. Okay, good. Did you say something, someone else?
Well, I was going to say that, but also just not knowing the language to use.
Okay, not knowing the language to use. Right? How do I qualify and substantiate my ways of being and knowing, right? And our experience is theory, right? The ways in which we live in our lives have to have validity, right? Okay, yes, jump in. Right. What if I am racist? What might that mean and look like? And how do I move beyond feeling vilified in a space, right? Okay, how do I bounce back from something I've said? Absolutely. Is there one more? This side of the room is jamming, right? Yeah, jump in. Yeah.
As a white person, I'm allowed not to.
Okay, right, and I love that, right? Because it reminds me, it takes me back to the place of when I was engaging the teacher, right? Who basically said, nope, I want to talk about poverty, and now you're talking about race, and I'm not going to engage it. Yep. All right. Yes. Jump in.
Understanding that you may lack respect.
That you what?
May lack respect.
May lack respect. Yeah, absolutely. Perspective. Okay. So experience and perspective. I got you. Yeah. All right. Let's say in the back there.
I'm thinking of race only on a personal level. And
Yeah.
not a systemic level.
Right. So race really doesn't matter. And besides, I have white friends, right? I have friends outside of my racial and ethnic group. That's the thing that gets me, Dean Ryan. You know, folks will say, I can't be racist, right? Don't you know I have a friend outside, one friend, but I have, and then we've had dinner together, right? Yeah. One more point.
To use my father's words, we have a black president, so we no longer have a race problem.
Right. We are post-racial. Don't you know it, Rich Milner? Can you move on, right? Okay. All right. Yeah. So some of us adopt. Sounds like maybe your dad and others adopt the colorblind positions and orientations to the work. Mindset one, if I acknowledge the racial or ethnic background of my students or myself, then I may be considered racist, right? I didn't plant anybody in the audience, did I? Right? That showed up, that emerged, I think, right? Mindset two, if I admit that people experience and see the world differently, I may be seen as politically incorrect. I may offend others, students, and so forth, if I express my reservations, my beliefs and reservations about race, or reservation about race. Mindset three, I should treat all my students the same, regardless of who they are, what their experiences are, or what their experiences or their home situations are, or what their experiences related to race happen to be. But we know on a classroom level that race matters, and that we need to, of course, reject these colorblind ideologies on an individual level, but also on a structural and a systemic level, right? And so adopting colorblind ideologies it makes it difficult for us to understand and to recognize there's an overrepresentation of students of color in special education. There's an underrepresentation of students of color in gifted education. You know, we always go back to Brown, you know, having conversations about Brown. And what we know is, you know, post-Brown, post-DSEG, all of a sudden the little white kids became gifted, right? We decided in order to maintain multiple school sites, we decided that we were going to come up with this tiering system, and all the little white kids are gifted, and the little black and brown children are just, you know, in these quote-unquote regular classrooms. We also don't recognize that there's an over-referral of black students to the office, and that black and brown students are being, as you've seen in the data, are experiencing expulsion and suspension rates at very high and alarming rates. And we say, surely it's the students themselves, right? And not our racist and classist, right, policies and procedures, right? And centering students. I want to talk now about a case study that's in the book. How many of y'all have read the book? Look at y'all. Look at that. All right. Case study 5. And I need you to hang with me because I have a limited amount of time. I need you to hang with me. And I tend to give too many details if I feel like you aren't getting it. So you better smile at me. I'm going to just keep repeating the same things over and over. That's what good teachers do, though, right? Good teachers want to make sure folks are with you, right? All right, so as I'm giving these, as I'm talking about the robbery, I want you to really hang with me because I tend to give too many details, or details you don't necessarily need. All right, so when I was conducting research for Start Where You Are, there was a robbery that was committed by high school students, okay? And the high school student was a feeder school to this middle school. All right, so y'all with me? So it wasn't the middle school students who committed the robbery, but they were high school students. I was conducting research in a middle school. So far, so good. All right, so it was the neighborhood school where the students stopped to get the Doritos and now later, what else do kids buy, the students buy these days when they're walking to hot chips, right? So it was that store, right? It was that store. And it was a mom and pop shop. There was a Chinese couple that ran the store in the community, and one of the a high school students shot and killed the store clerk. So this happened like on a Thursday, and I was scheduled to be back in the school for observations the following week. And so when I drove up on the yard and eavesdropped on the bus yard, guess what the students were talking about, even several days later? The robbery, right? They were still engaged in the robbery. And they were posing questions like, I wonder where they got the gun. I wonder how much time they're going to get, right? And so the first period, when I did observations, nothing. Second period, nothing. No mention of the robbery, no curriculum alignment. Third period, nothing. Fourth period, when I went to the cafeteria, students still engaged in the robbery, right? So as a part of my reciprocity for the work I was doing in the school, that's right, graduate students, reciprocity, right, giving back to the communities that serve you. Hello, right? I conducted professional development with the teachers. And so the following week, I was scheduled to be, I did a professional development with the teachers. And when I tell you, so I just started the PD session by saying, hey guys, I'm just wondering why you didn't engage the robbery in some way. And when I tell you the people in that room ganged up on me, like one after the other, they gave me reason after reason why it was completely inappropriate for them to engage, have conversations about, build a curriculum around the robbery, right? What do you think what are some of the things you think I may have heard? Anybody? What do you think?
It's not a subject you don't talk about that.
Right, I have to teach a real curriculum, Rich Milner, right? How dare you come in and suggest, right, go back to the university, okay? What else do you think I heard? They're too young, these are middle schoolers, yep, absolutely. Jump in. You were gonna say that, okay? I'm waiting on that one piece of feedback and, yeah.
They're already surrounded by it. So already
Right, why would we glorify romanticized race, right? Violence. Anybody else? Is there another person?
You would encourage other students to do it?
Yep, got that. Right. But when a teacher said to me, and the robbery won't show up on the test, like real talk. The other teachers almost in unison said, yeah, right? Now, I don't mean to be overly critical of teachers because they are operating in systems, right, that, we teach to, oh, sorry, see, you all right? Okay. All right. There we go. All right, good stuff. So I don't mean to be overly critical of teachers. That's not the idea here, right? But the idea that the teachers found it completely inappropriate to engage the race, although the students were thinking and talking about it, is, of course, from my perspective, problematic. And then there was a guy who, if I set my computer up on the right side of the classroom during PD, he sat on the left side of the classroom with his arms folded, right? If I set my computer up on the left side of the library, he sat on the right side of the library as far away from me as possible with his arms folded. And he raised his hand. Like the entire time I was in the school doing professional development and so forth, he never had one conversation. He never said one word to me, right? And on this day, he raised his hand, and I was thinking, come with it, because I ain't scared, right? And he said, and furthermore, I teach math and science. What in the world does a robbery have to do with my teaching math and science, right? And so I said, well, and I had to take responsibility, right? Because I had been talking about culture and teaching and so forth. I said, well, I gave some examples. I said, what if you pulled up, and where are my math folks? Don't be too critical. Where are math people? Don't be too critical of these examples I'm giving, right? I'm an ELA guy. So, all right, so I said, what if you pulled up Google Maps and you had the students guesstimate the amount of time it take for the responders to get from the police precinct, let's say, to the robbery site. There's some math in that, right? Driving various rates of speed. You get me? Where's the math person? I said, is that okay? That sounds decent? All right. Maybe not high level, but there's some math in that, right? I said, but what if you went a little bit deeper, right? And the math teacher actually had a conversation with the social studies teacher. Imagine that. And the social studies teacher, imagine if they had a chance to talk to each other. And the social studies teacher posed questions about gentrification and posed questions about geography of opportunity, right? And the students then engaged in some research projects where they looked at the relationship between gun shops or access to gun shops in particular communities and crime, right? There's some social studies and math in that, right? Or access to liquor stores and crime. There's some math in that as well. And I said, imagine if the social studies teacher, the math teacher, also had a conversation with the ELA teacher. And the ELA teachers had students develop a letter to the police precinct, right? To say, here are the issues we found in our community. And here are our recommendations about how we might be able to address or to redress some of the issues, right? There's some ELA in writing, right? Right, there's some ELA in writing. But what was most telling about my experience regarding this robbery was that the students, from what I came to understand, were grieving. Right? They were grieving. Now, I don't like to use words like trauma because that's not what I do. I read about trauma, but I don't know about trauma to that degree. But I do have a good sense of what grief is. And you know how I know they were grieving? Because in my conversations with them in the cafeteria, they made it clear. The assumption was that they were grieving because of the shooters, the people who committed the crime. But they were grieving because many of them had developed relationships with the store clerks, right? But in black and brown schools, in schools where students live below the poverty line, we say they'll get through it. We even have a name for it in the literature. We call it resilience. Shame on us. Shame on us. Your grown self, when you're grieving, when you're going through challenging situations, don't you need mechanisms and structures to be able to work through those challenging situations? But we just expect students, our black and brown students, to just deal with it, to get up and to just move forward and to just move on. Shame on us. Shame on us. And then we hear people say, well, we don't have money. We don't have the funds to have more guidance counselors and social workers and psychologists and so forth in our schools. And my response is simple. Yet we can build more prisons. You know? Yet we can build more prisons. It's a moral imperative that we reshape and we rethink the ways in which we engage our youth. And it's raced. When Jeff Duncan Andrade was here a few years ago and he did a lecture, he and his research team, they looked at data and they looked at Columbine, and they found that students in Columbine are still receiving counseling and psychological services, right? For those students. And you know what? They should be. But for our children, we say they just got to bounce back. They've just got to bounce back. And so when students walk into the classroom and tell you to kiss their ass, that's right, I said it. Then it puts you in a place where you want, and the first thing teachers say is out. Get your stuff and get out. That's what we say in our schools. Rather than looking at and figuring out ways to support our students to be and to maximize their capacity. I know I'm right about it. About 1 in 5 schools across the country doesn't have a guidance counselor. About 1 in 5 schools doesn't have a guidance counselor. And I got to move a lot faster. I got carried away there. All right, so the curriculum, now I want to talk just a bit about this notion of curriculum, and I'm drawing from the work of Elliot Eisner here. And Eisner says that the curriculum operates on 3 levels. It's explicit. We know the explicit curriculum. We know we're teaching it. It's intentional. It shows up through the standards, it shows up on websites, and the like. We also teach an implicit curriculum. You know this, it's hidden, it's sometimes implicit, right? But we're teaching an implicit curriculum as well. But there's also, and this is the most fascinating form of the curriculum, is the null curriculum. And the null curriculum is what we don't teach in schools. What we don't teach in schools. So imagine the learning opportunities embedded in what students are not exposed to regarding the robbery. What lessons are they learning, right? The same thing is true for small children, like for young children. I was in a classroom, you think about, so when in a kindergarten classroom, Jamie comes in with his mother, and the student in the class says, "Hi," this is kindergarten class, when the student says, "Hey, Jamie's mommy has on a red shirt." And the teacher picks that up, as a good teacher should, and says, "That's right. And we talked about the color red." Good, you're good, I like that. Red yesterday, and red starts with the letter R, right? And then the next day, Jamie comes in with his two mommies, right? And on this day, when Jamie comes in with his two mommies, and the student says, "Wait a minute, I have a mommy and a daddy. You have two mommies." And the teacher says, "No. We're not going to talk about that." What messages are embedded in the implicit curriculum when we avoid conversations, even with young children, about sexuality, right? In a similar way, when we avoid conversations, that's right, I'm saying it, about black and brown bodies, right, that are unfairly shot down, arguably, and killed, what message are we sending to our students when our students see themselves intricately tied and aligned and linked to these bodies? And the response of teachers is, "I've got to teach a real curriculum." Let me tell you something. This is the real curriculum. This is the real curriculum. The real curriculum is the text and the texts, right, that students are experiencing on a daily basis, right? And so because I live in a black body, right, I have to be, my dad called me about, my dad is he drove a forklift for many years, and then then he became a janitor, right? And my dad doesn't mince words. He says what he has to say, and then he hangs up on you, right? He's like, "Are we still having a conversation?" I guess not. He hung up on me, right? So, and he called me a couple of months ago, and he said to me, he said, "Rich, you're up there." He thinks Pittsburgh is the real city, right? They're down in Georgia, but he thinks Pittsburgh is like the big city, right? So he called, and he's like, "Rich, you up there driving around in that big city," and he said, "I want you to be careful." He said, "Because, those cops and stuff are up there following you around." And he was like, "You're going to bury me. I'm not going to bury you," right? And it was at that, and then he hung up, right? Then he hung up. And it was at that moment that I'm reminded that even as a 40-something-year-old, I don't I look good for 40-something-year-old? As a 40-something-year-old man, my dad cares for me in a way, and he has to, and he reflects about my being in a very different way. So my colleagues at the university can intellectualize what's happening with Michael Brown and others. For me, and for parents, and for other black and brown parents, it takes on a whole new level of what the curriculum means and should mean. And guess what? For your students, they are grappling with and dealing with these situations as well, but we teach them through the null curriculum something that says it doesn't matter. I got to move a lot faster. Lot faster. One student said in my research, he said, "The shit gets old. The shit gets on my nerves. These damn white people follow me around the store like I'm going to steal the clothes off their backs. The white boys are in the store and nobody's checking them. It's their brothers they're following around, The shit gets old." I'm sorry I'm cussing so much, but I'm just honoring their voices, right? I'm sick of it. I've been working since I was 12 and saving. I can buy whatever I want in those stores. But you know, it's because I'm a brother, they're checking every move I make. A female student put it to me like this. She said, and you know how you're doing interviews, Natasha, and you're supposed to pose the question and sit back. But when this student was responding, I almost got up and gave her a high five, right? Because this resonates with me even today. The student said, it's like whenever I say something in class, the teacher is like, well, that's interesting. But when a white student says the same thing or makes the same point, she's like, that's a great point. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what I just said, right? She always does that. So I just stopped talking, participating in class. And so what we've come to understand is that students are experiencing what's known as racial microaggressions, right? Yes, I know I'm right about it. And racial microaggressions are these brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, and negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. And what happens is students who are experiencing these racial microaggressions, sometimes they default to or they move to spaces where they don't participate. It becomes taxing. You know, Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And so they start to experience this racial battle fatigue, right? And I try to articulate to my colleagues what I'm experiencing or what students are experiencing. And it's very difficult sometimes for them to understand. And then that also leaves me wondering, like, wow, when are things going to get better? Even as an endowed chair, right? So, serving students of color. What I'm going to do now is I want to turn there and talk about some recommendations. And what you will see here is the longer I'm in this work, Dr. Lightfoot, people are trying to move me to a macro. You know, like my heart, though, all day long is micro. I care deeply about working with teachers. My bet is on teachers. Who's going back into the classroom? Raise your hand if you're going back in the classroom. I am relying on you. I believe our best bet is for teachers who are in classrooms, and you can do it. We need you. We really need you. So what you're going to see here is a clip from potential teachers who are working in a school, and this is sort of midway through the semester. And what we're documenting is we're trying to improve, of course, the ways in which we are educating them. But you know, if I had more time, I'd show you an earlier video clip where they were talking, and really all of the emphases were placed on students and their families. You know, the families don't care, the students come in and they're not motivated. All of this, right, ways in which, you know, people who don't know better are engaging and thinking about our students. There's another big lesson here as well, and that is who's participating in the discourse. There are community members there who are teaching and learning. So you'll see them, and students are also teaching and learning as well. And I want you to listen to how they're framing and talking about what's happening to students, even in 2015. All right. So as you see there, even in 2015, we're grappling with some of the same challenges and some of the same situations that we've been talking about for so long. In terms of moving the subjective into the objective, we've also, in terms of meeting the needs of students, and particularly children of color, what the research shows is this. The research shows that students of color are referred to the office for what's known as objective infractions, and white students are referred to the office. Students of color are referred to the office for what's known as subjective infractions. And white students are referred to the office for what's known as objective ones, right? So, for black and brown students, you're too loud or you're being disrespectful. Russ Skiba and his research team looked at thousands of disciplinary referrals. And what he found was that overwhelmingly students of color are being sent out for being rude or for being disrespectful. Now, white students are being sent out because let's say class starts at 5 o'clock and you arrive at 5:05. I look at my digital clock, right? You're late, right? So we've got to recognize that. We've also got to shift and talk about assets versus deficits. You know, if you look at this example, Carla, a high school student who is working 6 to 8 hours a week, or 6 to 8 hours a day after school at a fast food restaurant that helps support her family. She passes all of her classes and shows up at school every day, but her schoolwork is not exceptional. A teacher's deficit perspective, poor Carla, she works too many hours. Although she passes my class, she could do so much better if she spent more time studying and less time working. Her schoolwork could be better. But a teacher's asset perspective, Carla demonstrates the capacity to balance her schoolwork and her part-time job. I should talk with her about how I can assist her to make sure she is maximizing the class while she is working so hard in her part-time job. This balancing act between school and work is commendable. You see how the lens shifts there? And so, with no apologies to Oscar Lewis or Ruby Payne, there is no culture of poverty. There is no culture of poverty. And moreover, race is not a disability, and poverty is not a disability. In terms of recommendations, here's a list here. The one big one that or two or three I'll focus on here. One is we've got to increase the number of adults in every classroom. What I found when I traveled across the country is when there are multiple adults in every classroom, for instance, a lead teacher, an assistant teacher, a counselor, a social worker, a community member, that provides the kind of synergy, if you will, that allows teachers to teach. What we know for sure is that students succeed when the social is addressed and attended to. We've got to radically reform in-school suspension as well. If we're going to continue sending our babies, our black and brown bodies outside of school, we've got to move beyond these prison-like environments that really reify what we expect or what some expect from our students, right? We've got to build racial and ethnic identity among our students, right? There's compelling empirical research. Jay Hughley, who is a professor at Pitt, who actually graduated from the Harvard Graduate School, he is showing in his research the link between strong academic achievement and strong racial and ethnic identity. That is, if I feel strongly about my own racial and ethnic identity, I tend to do better, right? My conjecture is, or maybe it's a conspiracy theory, that the reason white students are doing well on academic measures is because they feel so strongly about their own racial and ethnic identity, right? They're taught that they're exceptional. They're told at a very, very young age that white is right? Some other examples here. Although my colleagues here might completely disagree with the recommendation of reducing class size, what I've come to understand, because we don't see strong increases in quote-unquote outcomes, what I've come to understand for what's known in the literature as school-dependent students, though reducing class size can be the difference maker for students. You talk students off the ledge sometimes when there are fewer students for teachers to have to address. And so I conclude with this, and I'm going to put it very succinctly. Some students, ladies and gentlemen, will succeed because of you, and some students are going to succeed in spite of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.